This is Michael Woodward, and this is episode 243 of Jumblethink.
T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Jumblethink, where we interview amazing entrepreneurs about their journey of turning dreams and ideas into reality. Along the way, we're going to share some tips on how you can turn your own dreams and ideas into reality too. Our guest on today's show is Tuff, the Millennial Whisperer. More about Chris in a moment. Whether you're a new listener or a longtime fan of Jumblethink, you can catch every episode by subscribing to our podcast. And it's easy to do. Head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts and search for Jumblethink and subscribe. For Apple Podcasts, super simple, jumblethink.com/iTunes. And for Spotify, jumblethink.com/Spotify. Take you right to the app, right to where you can subscribe. While you're there, leave us a rating and review and let others know what you think too. Now let's jump into our conversation with Tuff. Hey there, welcome to Jumblethink. My name is Michael Woodward. I am your host. We have a great episode lined up. We're talking about millennials and the world of millennials with Tuff, the Millennial Whisperer. We're going to get into that in a moment. Before we do, we want to take a moment and thank our sponsors for today's episode, Penji. Penji offers unlimited graphic design at a low monthly subscription. Get 15% off by using the code JUMBLE, Jumble, when you head on over to penji.com. That's penji.com. Use that code JUMBLE. Get 15% off your first month. All right, so today's guest, his name's Tuff. He's written a book called The Millennial Whisperer. You can check it out at themillennialwhisperer.com. Who is Tuff? Well, as one of the first marketers to work with startups like Facebook in 2005, Chris has built his career surrounded by millennials while becoming one of the sought-out leaders in the digital marketing space. He's a partner at the advertising agency 22 Squared in Atlanta, Georgia, where he successfully attracts, motivates, and whispers to millennials every day. When Chris isn't working, he's kiteboarding, mountain biking, running, and spending quality time with his wife and 2 daughters. Let's go ahead and jump into our conversation with today's guest, Tuff. Our guest today is Tuff. I am so excited to have him on. I love his topic. It's called The Millennial Whisperer. That's his book. And excited to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You know, we are trying something new here at Jumblethink. We've gotten some feedback. And one of the things people love about our show is a rapid fire question. So we're going to kick it off right with rapid fire questions. But before we do that, I want you to give people maybe a minute of an intro of who you are.
Sure. So, I mean, I don't know how to do it because I'm worried about what's going to happen with my rapid fire questions. But so I'm an identical twin, married to an identical twin. People always get a kick out of that. I got my first foray in the kind of digital marketing side of things as I fell into digital marketing right out of school.
Wow.
And, was, not by design. I was one of the first people to kind of work with Facebook and some of the others. And it was also, I used my stories as examples of what it looks like when you're actually pursuing your passions. Ridiculous things happen to you. And so I was one of the first viral videos in 2006 as I put my video of me getting engaged to my wife, where I went from spraining my ankle to popping the question. And it was a scale of emotion before YouTube that the internet had never really seen. Good Morning America flew down, interviewed us for that. We ended up getting 7 million views on ChristopherTuff.com. And I had to pay for the bandwidth. We were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and everyone's like, Chris, you're the most ridiculous person. It's like, actually, no, this is just evidence of when your kind of purpose, passion collides, which is, I think, what we're all deep down looking for. I say life needs to be a ruthless pursuit of passions. And so that then got me my first department in social media in 2006, because I was told if I got 1 million views of a quote unquote viral video, then they'd give me my own department.
Wow.
And the rest was kind of history from there, as I've always tended to be about 2 years ahead of where the trends are. And it was interesting. Someone the other day was asking me about my book, The Millennial Whisperer, which was published 3 months ago. And he's like, so do you think this is where things are going? You've always been kind of 2 years ahead.
Yeah.
And I excitedly said, I I think we're finally getting to a point where everything that I'm doing right now is around two main tenets, which is how do we bring more empathy and more human to human connection into our lives? And why not start where we spend 9 hours a day? And I said back to him, I was like, yes, I do. I think we're finally getting to that place. And not everyone sees it, but it's starting to happen. Yeah. And that's exciting.
Super, super cool. We're going to circle back in our second segment into that conversation because there is a lot to unpack just in that short little intro you gave us. But before we do that, we're going to do rapid fire questions. These are a lot of fun. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. As a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
A doctor, weirdly.
Okay. And what is one tip you'd give someone with a big idea or dream and they don't know where to start?
Make it happen. Actually put actions. It's all the small actions that make an idea a reality. So break it down.
What is one big lie about entrepreneurship you want to break?
That I feel like we hold entrepreneurship up on a pedestal and we have the wrong milestone moments within that we credit people with. So raising money being one of those, there's actually nothing worse than raising money because it means you needed it in the first place. So, there's certain things I feel like we need to eradicate, and people need to know that they're going to be experiencing a massive roller coaster. And there's a lot of similarities with being an entrepreneur and publishing your own book. And as my editor, Nick Pavlidis, told me, it's the greatest test of your mental health. So I would say entrepreneurship is the same thing.
What is one big change you'd like to see in the world?
I think this move towards actually choosing light over dark. I think there's been, statistically speaking, there's never been a better time to be alive, and it's up to us to elicit that change and to help everyone around us choose light.
When you say light versus dark, what do you mean? What does that really mean?
Optimism and pessimism. And,
okay.
I say anytime someone comes to work with me, they're like, so what does it take to succeed? I said 3 things. 1, put the organization or whatever it is ahead of yourself and your own ego. Always be willing to. Number 2, always be willing to get your hands dirty. And number 3, have a can-do attitude. And choosing light for me is it's that can-do attitude. It's we're going to get this done. Where there's a will, there's a way. Put in the work, take action, versus saying the woe is me and the world. There's that kind of pessimistic point of view. And it's the same when you hear about kind of energy givers and energy takers. I have no time for the energy takers. And there are times that we all need help and we'll become that taker, but we've got to flow through that and be more of a river versus like a stagnant pond, as some people call it, where it's like you're always that negative person. And so choosing light for me is, I feel like, the most imperative moment. And you look at entrepreneurship, these things are roller coasters. Life is a roller coaster. Yeah. And when we hit rock bottom or we didn't get the funding or whatever that is, it's in that moment that we have to choose light because it's a parabola. And we, I think, as a society, think that there's a quick fix to everything. And the reality is, if it's truly a parabola, it's going to slowly get better with time. But it's at that moment you can either choose to give up and give into the darkness or to choose light. And I choose light, baby.
I love it. What do you want your legacy to be?
I think my legacy is that's a great question, and that's a big one. But for me, it's how can we create more real connection, person to person, and genuine connection in our lives. And I want that to be more of a contagious effect. So I want to be a piece of that overarching contagion, if you will, of connection. And, you look at any of our friends or yourself or any of these challenging moments that you go through, I think our instinct is usually to cower in the corner with a journal by ourselves and just relentlessly take yourself down this horrible mind think. And what we need in those moments more than anything is a real connection with others. And so if I can help elicit that connection that pulls all those people into over that precipice, then I've done my job.
Where do you find inspiration?
Through conversation and stories.
Okay.
And I think there's not enough emphasis on that. And I now find myself in these ridiculous moments, which I'll probably talk about at some point. But, there's so much to learn from people's experiences. And I don't think we spend so much time talking about ourselves versus asking people what happened to them and how can we learn from those things.
What is one book you think every dreamer or entrepreneur should read, and why?
Good question. Funny enough, even though I did write my book, I read mostly novels.
Okay.
And so the one that has been sticking in my mind, I would say, and it's somewhat cliche right now, but The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F-U-C-K by Mark Manson was... Yeah. I think especially the chapter that he wrote about success was imperative to my own kind of reestablishing foundation as I've gone into my entrepreneurial things. And success, I think, for any of us is one of those things that we can dissect and probably figure out a better metric, because what is success for your company, I think, or yourself? So I would say right now it's that one, even though it is somewhat cliche.
Well, leading up to that was your lead up was perfect. How do you define success?
So for me, when I rock bottom, which was 2.5 years ago, which looked like, I had lost sight of what was really important to me. I was on the road. I was wining and dining with the Sheryl Sandbergs and startup entrepreneur who's who. And I'd lost sight of what was really important to me. And so one was my priorities of my 2 daughters and wife. And the second one was my metric of success was not right. And if you looked, and it was actually reading that book that I looked at myself. And it's funny because Mark talks about this story of the head drummer from Metallica and how he ended up leaving Metallica to start Megadeth. And after selling out one of the stadiums, Rolling Stone asked him, or someone was like, so what do you think of your success? And he goes, I don't have success yet until I beat Metallica.
Wow.
And that's why I created Megadeth.
Wow.
And so I looked at myself. My metric was beating my brothers in this game of life. And so I reassessed. I was like, maybe that's not the best metric for success.
Yeah.
And so I changed it to where success will be judged on a daily basis when my head hits my pillow. And that success metric will be amount of impact made, basically energy put into the day and impact made. And nice. I can say that for the last 2.5 years, I've gone to bed successful, which is great.
That's awesome. What is one trend you're currently excited about?
I would say that I think this focus on ourself is a trend that investing in ourselves. And it was interesting. I had the opportunity with my friend Tommy Breedlove to have dinner with Colin O'Brady, who just went across Antarctica. And I wanted to create, he has 5 world records. He actually helped me through a very difficult time in my writing process as I was finding inspiration as he was stuck in these blizzards in the middle of Antarctica. And if he had fallen behind, he was going to die.
Wow.
And so, I look to him for some of those sources of inspiration. And it's unbelievable about what you can learn from some of these people. So what was the original question for that one with Colin?
Yeah. What is one trend you're currently excited about?
Oh, yeah. So the one thing he emphasized was it's so interesting that as human beings, the things that we hold so near and dear are the first things that we sacrifice.
Yeah.
And that is ourselves and our loved ones.
Yeah. And
what's the first thing we do when we get home? We put on Netflix or we tune out with our mobile phones and we fail to have true connection. But we also fail to invest in ourselves. Yeah. We don't pay for the coaches. We don't pay for the gym membership or personal training or therapy or whatever it is. And I think that it's such a good point. So I think investing in yourself. And I'm so long-winded in your quick fire questions. I apologize.
What is one habit that you find helpful in your life as an entrepreneur?
I think breaking things into snippets and taking action on a daily basis. And so I have a thing where you're only allowed 3 things on your list a day. And so I think to-do lists become really long. So what are your 3 things that you're going to do?
Yeah.
And keep those front and center. So put them on a whiteboard, put them on your phone, whatever it is. 3 things, no more than 3 things.
Now, you've been doing this for a while. What is the one thing you wish you would have known when you first started out?
I mean, and I'm still working on this, but it takes time. Patience is something that I'm a hustler. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs and creators are that. We're either creators or we're like order people. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs can attest to the fact that they're creators. So
yeah.
I'm learning patience. And actually it's with Tommy Breedlove. He's helped me a lot with this, but he says any successful foundation for whatever you're doing needs to be built upon gratitude. And then everything else will follow that. And I called him the other day as tactically, I actually have a 7-minute journal where first thing I do in the morning is I do the 7-minute journal. And the last thing I do before I go to bed is the 7-minute journal, which is basically what are the 3 things you're most grateful for and answering those questions. And it's interesting how I called him the other day and I was like, dude, I'm actually more patient now than I ever have. I think patience is actually a byproduct of gratitude. He was like, Chris, you're learning. So it's some of those things, but it's not like I regret not learning this because that's part of the process, right? I mean, ideally a year from now, I'll look back on myself and be like, oh my God, I was so immature back then, which means I developed a lot. So at the same time, but patience is one of those things that I'm still learning.
And for you, those of you listening, Chris has mentioned Tommy Breedlove a couple times. He's been on the show. You should go check out that episode. Tommy is awesome, and we're going to talk more about Tommy and how he triggered your book in a little bit. Our next rapid fire question is, if you weren't doing what you're doing today, what do you think you'd be doing?
I think I'd be a teacher. And I love the kind of I was choosing between being a college counselor and English teacher or going into advertising, and I chose advertising because I was told that I can always go back to being a teacher and a college counselor. So I think I'd be that.
Nice. Our final rapid fire question is, what is one dream you're still wanting to fulfill in your own life?
Living abroad.
Okay.
I have these dreams of, I was asked something similar recently, and my dream is that I can come back. I'm a big kiteboarder stuck in Atlanta, so I have to get away a lot. But my dream is coming back from kiteboarding, and it's like this vision of my 2 daughters and wife hanging out on the beach or running around. And we all hang out, and then I go back inside, and my house is somewhere there, and I'm cooking on the grill, and I pop in, do a little bit of work, and then I pop out, and it's like this vision of kind of, when we'll talk about it, but like truly work-life integration, where I've got my family, I've got my sport, I'm actually getting stuff done with life and work. And I feel like so often in today's modern age, we rely on traditional norms, and that vision of kind of living abroad or just that balance of kind of work-life integration is one that I aspire for.
Super cool. We will be right back with Chris Tuff to go deeper into being the Millennial Whisperer, what that means, and so much more.
Today's show is presented by our friends over at Penji. Penji helps startups, agencies, and marketing teams achieve more with unlimited graphic design support at one flat monthly rate. Their easy-to-use online platform pairs you with a professional designer and lets you create as many design projects as you want. Think of it as your monthly subscription to top-notch design. No contracts, no hourly billing, just fast and simple and affordable graphic design for all of your needs. We've been using it for some of our projects internally here at Jumblethink, including our logo for idea camps. We couldn't be happier, so you should go check them out. Use the code JUMBLE, JUMBLE, to get 15% off your first month of Penji. Head on over, Penji, PENJI.com. Use that code JUMBLE to get 15% off your first month. Now let's rejoin our conversation with today's guest, Chris Tuff.
We are back with Chris Tuff. All right, before we get rolling, there's something important that we haven't talked about and people might be wondering, and that is, how can they find and connect with you?
Great question. So I am at Tuff22 on Instagram. And I tell people anything that hits my phone is a lot better than an email because I have like 200 and something thousand emails. So at Tuff22 and message me there, Christopher Tuff on LinkedIn. And then a lot of the information about me and the book are on themillennialwhisperer.com. And that's 2 L's, 2 N's. I learned that the hard way, having written a book about millennials. Millennials are very different. Sometimes you forget the L, sometimes you forget the N. But you can download the first chapter there, learn more about kind of me, the book, and also connect with the various platforms that we're on.
Super cool. Now, this show has a lot of millennial listeners, and it's a big target for who we're reaching. That's why I was super excited to have you on, because that is your passion through this book. I've been reading the book. I'm not done with it, but getting through it, taking my time, enjoying the book, and really processing it. Tell us the backstory of why you wrote a book about millennials.
Sure. And one of my favorite quotes that's come up since publishing the book is a friend of mine who came up to me and goes, Chris, I get it. Millennials aren't the problem. They just expose all the problems.
Oh, wow.
And
That's good.
Said, exactly. I'm basically using a lot of the strife that millennials feel in our workplaces and using them as the catalyst towards change to change the way that we work and the way that our corporations are run or companies are run. And so I think that's an important point. But, for the book itself, I mean, what inspired it was I had hit rock bottom 2.5 years ago. And I went from basically being the Don Draper from Mad Men and head of business development at our firm where I'm a partner to taking a month off and really taking it down to the absolute, ground layer of my own makeup and what drove me. And one of the things that I found within that moment was not only changing my metric of success, which was critical, doubling down on my family, which was critical, but also moving from this leader being the tip of the sword and selling to being a true empowering leader to where I can coach and to where I can spend my time making my employees, that just so happen to be 30 of them millennials, better people. Yeah. And so 7 months after getting into it, I was like, I would come home more fired up than I'd ever been.
Wow.
And I'd tell my wife, I'm like, this is what I've been put on the earth to do.
Wow.
And I went on an executive men's retreat in the mountains with Tommy Breedlove leading it. I didn't know Tommy at the time. He was hired to be basically the leader of this stuff. And he was found via a podcast. Maybe it was yours that he was found. But so we were all introducing ourselves around the fire, and I introduced myself, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I introduce myself as? I'm no longer kind of business development. I'm no longer the social media guy. I said, and in the moment, it kind of hit me. I was like, I'm kind of like the millennial whisperer.
Yeah.
And then I went on and shared my story. I sat down next to Tommy, and he kicks me. And if anyone's met Tommy, he's got like these big blue eyes, and he's kind of intimidating because he's so passionate.
Yeah.
And he turns to me and he goes, you better write that book. And I was like, sir, what book? And he goes, The Millennial Whisperer. And I was like, oh, okay. And then so that then triggered a conversation around the fire with these other, I'd say the average age was 40s, younger 40s. And they're like, so tell me some of the stuff that you do. And I started talking about some of the tactics that I put into place. And they're like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You do that stuff? I'm like, yeah. And then it was right then that Tommy looked at me and was like, yeah, you got a book here. And then the rest was history. That was about 18 months ago. We published about 3 months ago. We sold about 35,000 copies. We, hit the bestseller list. We'll be in every airport in June. And I think we're just getting warmed up. But once again, my metric of success with this one is impact. I want to change the way that our organizations are run. And it's funny because I actually feel like the millennials get it, right? Like when I'm speaking at these corporations or like people will pull me aside and be like, thank you. Like my boss was in the audience and they really needed to hear it. I see it. I mean, I've been on like 100 radio interviews, and it's the millennial set that they're like, I get you, Chris, I get you. So it's interesting to see the reception and it's very human nature where trying to teach people new ways of working is difficult. And I think, but the good news is I think we're starting to have some impact.
To lay a good ground foundation, one of the things I've got to ask is when were you born? How old are you?
Sure. I was 1980, which
Okay.
puts me 1 year away from the millennial set. So I am 38 years old, and I'm very up. I think that allows me to, I think, understand millennials. And I'll also say that deep down, I'm more of a millennial than most millennials. Like a lot of the things that statistically millennials want, reward recognition, inspirational leadership, autonomy, transparency, I live that stuff, so that's natural to me. But for listeners' sake, it is 1981 to 1996. So 37-year-olds to 23-year-olds.
Yeah.
And so right now we're actually starting to see the first Gen Zs enter the workforce, which I set out in the book isn't very different than younger millennials. And, older millennials are very different than younger millennials, and younger millennials are very much like Gen Z.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, because like I've done a lot of reading about this. I was born in '81, so technically a lot of places put me as millennial, but there's like this little pocket generation from like '78 to '82 where it's kind of like a fluid transition time. All that to say, you mentioned here that a younger millennial is different than an older millennial. Talk to us about that difference.
Sure, and I think it's way too large of a segment to. And it's like any generation. Older boomers are very different than younger boomers, and older Xers are different than younger Xers.
Yeah.
But millennials, if you look at the sociological effects of what makes them different, it's two main things that make them generations. And I break them into older millennials, which I call Oregon Trail millennials, because they played Oregon Trail as part of their computer education classes, which if anyone's ever played Oregon Trail, it's like the most old school 2-bit, 8-bit game you've ever seen.
Yeah, that was like a third or fourth grade for me. I remember it vividly.
Exactly.
I remember the computer room. I remember exactly where it is. Yeah.
So you compare that from a technology standpoint to younger millennials. They were given an iPhone with a Snapchat account on it at age 13.
Yeah.
And we had beepers in college, like beepers. You had to go to a phone, like you would get a number displayed on this beeper, which would beep, which you would then go to a phone to call that number. That's very different than the iPhone generation. So that is one of the greatest differences in what makes these generations, I think, distinctively Oregon Trail millennials and Snapchat millennials. I call younger millennials Snapchat millennials. And then the other piece is also what they're looking for in their workforce. Older millennials were in the workforce when the recession of 2008 hit, and that affected them 2008, 2009, 2010, starting to recover in 2011, which is very different than younger millennials who saw their parents lose their jobs.
Yeah.
And therefore inherited a lot of that student debt and a lot of the things that we're starting to read statistically about all the debt that's happening. That's what makes the younger millennials different. So it's really the technology piece and then the recession that I think makes these two very distinctively different generations.
Well, and one of the things that I've read a lot about is that the older millennials or even younger Gen Xers, when they were entering the workforce and rising up the ranks, or when they should have been when the recession hit, has actually set them back significantly harder than any other pocket of any other generation, because they weren't able to get into the positions to necessarily like own a house or to move up the ladder like a younger millennial did or an older Gen Xer. They kind of got a short end of the stick because of the recession. Did you kind of find that too?
Exactly. And that's what makes me so excited. Wall Street Journal, and look it up, they had a jarring statistic 2 days ago, which would have been, look up early May whenever this thing airs, Wall Street Journal article on millennials, but it shows statistically just how much they have stacked against them. And my whole thing with this first book is how do we change our corporations to better accommodate for this generation? But not only that, but to make it better and easier for them to thrive. And, you look at, and I talk about it in the book, but you look at even equity distribution I think is a big piece where more and more companies will be following suit of those that are setting the standard for where things are going that are millennial led. I mean, look at Facebook, right? Look at some of these companies that are moving in, some of the breweries out there that are killing it. They've actually gone to ESOPs, right? Employee stock ownership programs, which is one piece of a massive kind of puzzle that is the changes that we're going to start seeing happening within companies, private and corporations, public, that people need to adapt around. And what's funny is that I'll see these companies put a $500 million investment to build a brand new building with a food hall and everything else. And it's like, guys, that's the last thing you should be investing in. Like you're just trying to find a quick fix to a cultural problem, a leadership problem, an equity problem. These things are so much deeper, and that's what I'm out to kind of that's what I'm setting out to help bring change in.
One of the earlier parts of your book, when you're talking about millennials, you write this: first, let's consider a basic truth. Everyone has the potential to succeed given the right environment, a supportive culture, and key opportunities. Whether we are Sheryl Sandberg, Steve Jobs, we thrive in circumstances of curiosity, challenge, and control. Millennials are, believe it or not, just like us, and then some. They're the most important group of people to any company's future success. They're the vast majority of workers and consumers. Vilifying them will seal our fate. We seem to be a society that tries to pit us against them. We're going to be the winners. They're going to be the losers. And that's just how it's going to be. Talk to us about how that mindset is really setting up businesses and individuals for failure.
Yeah, I mean, I think us versus them is a big issue within, I mean, just within companies. And so I think it starts with leadership, right? And I would go down to, we hold up the wrong leadership characteristics as to what's important right now.
Yeah.
And if you look at what millennials are looking for statistically, according to the 2018 Deloitte Millennial Survey, what they're looking for in their leaders are inspirational leadership, transparency, autonomy, and something that gives a real purpose to what they're doing outside of their bottom line or profit margins.
Yeah.
And I think the shift of that from what we're currently judging effective leadership on is one of the many things that we need to help do. Okay, so I think that's one piece, and I could dissect each one of those however you want. And I've got a story for each one of those. But you look at this us versus them mentality, it's up to leadership to bring us together.
Yeah.
And that starts with connection. And I was talking to a somewhat famous CEO recently as I'm trying to help them with some of their culture problems and issues. And he turned to me, he was like, Chris, I am not posting all of my personal life on social media so all of my millennial employees can watch it and see it. And I was like, I turned to this person and said, that's fine. Yeah. They don't care about that.
Yeah.
You know what they care about? Is that you have a vested interest in their lives and create connection that way. So follow them. Even if you have a blank account, like follow them. And on a Monday, you can actually start a conversation and say, that lunch that you had with your grandmother looks so special. Tell me more about that. Right. So you get immediately into this connection, and it's through that connection that we start moving towards this us versus them mentality. And instead of us versus them becomes us versus our competitors. And you create this culture and this connection that we are a team. And one of the examples I bring up in the book, and tactically I think some people find an easier time implementing, is this idea of protect this house. And protect this house is a term that Ben Kirshner, who I interviewed around the book, he was called out by Forbes magazine as the number one boss for millennials.
Wow.
And in talking to him, and talking to certain leadership qualities like autonomy, one of the things he brought up was protect this house. And protect this house is as simple as saying that if you have a bad culture fit on the team, if you have someone if you have an unlimited paid vacation policy and they're taking too much, it's up to your people to protect this house.
Wow.
And protecting this house is us. We are a team, and no one can mess with that. And when you have something special and something differentiated and something that is culturally awesome, people will protect this house. And that's the best example of autonomy. Giving and pushing down that responsibility takes the form in all that.
If we look back at history, we look at the World War II generation, and we look at how coming out of the Great Depression, going into World War II, there was a scarcity. And then we look at like our parents' generation, and there was just excess. And so it was like, we got to consume, we've got to have. And millennials seem to be moving against that. Like their values are so dramatically different than generations before them on what's significant to them. So talk to us a little bit about how we, I guess, two parts. One, what do they value?
Mm-hmm.
And the second part is how can we reconcile value systems that are vastly different between generations?
So I think the first part of the question is just the importance around purpose. And, I talk to a lot of audiences of boomers and Xers where it's like, if everyone on your team doesn't understand what you stand for purpose wise, then you got to figure it out. Okay. And so that purpose also needs to be something more than just your bottom line and profit margins once again. So for example, at our agency, 22 Squared, where I'm a partner, we put our purpose as together we give rise to change. So that means changing the world for the better around us, but then also making sure that we're helping our clients evolve for the ever-changing consumer consumption habits of iPhones and everything else. So then what's that look like? Well, we give every employee 5 days off to donate their time to give rise to change within their environments to a nonprofit of their choice. So we give them 5 days vacation. And so you look at the value systems and, one, putting a purpose in place, but then two, putting those tactics that actually follow through that purpose. So walking the talk. Statistically, people will ask me, so what's the worst thing you can do for a millennial workforce? And that's hypocrisy. So when you say that you stand for something, walk the talk and follow through and bring those things to life through tactical, organized things. So I think the first part is, and if you don't have purpose, like good luck with Gen Z. I mean, and what we're finding with Gen Z is that, and the younger millennials, is that stuff just becomes even more important.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
How is your company actually contributing to the overall world? And that's also where I'm like, guys, the world's getting better. The people this is called evolution in that people are getting better. And the Gen Z is a great example of that. So I think this move to purpose is probably value system wise one of the biggest and most important things. But then also, the hypocrisy thing and walking the talk and the need for transparency within leadership. And transparency, I think, is something that is easily misinterpreted because a lot of companies think by their leaders that transparency means they need to be vulnerable and cry in front of their people.
That didn't work well for Elon Musk lately.
No. Or, really anyone.
Yeah.
Or it means that they have to show all of their financial results.
Wow.
And what they're actually looking for in that is their people want context. So when you make a mistake, say, guys, we screwed up last week. And you know what we learned from that? It's this. And what that means for the overall picture of our organization, it means this. They want context. That's what they're looking for in terms of transparency. So, you look at value system changes, you look at this need for purpose, and then you look at how we need to hold up the different characteristics within leadership. Those are the things that this book is setting out to help rectify. That's the first part of the question, at least.
And the second part was, how do we reconcile generations that have vastly different value systems so that we can work together?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it's one thing that I talk about in the book is one, we always feel like we have to create all things to all people within our organizations versus allowing people to create separate cultures within the organization. And I think every one of us as individuals are different, right? So screw the generation thing, throw that out the window.
Okay.
So instead, I think what we need to be focusing in on is individuals and how we accommodate individuals, kind of what I say, ruthless pursuit of passions. So one is allowing individuals to support their side hustles, right? So give your people time to support side hustles that will fuel them through to the bad stuff, the downs in our life, the parts of our job that we don't like, or what might just be a tough period where I'm working late. Let's make sure we give our people the ability to pursue side hustles and making sure that those aren't competitive to your core offering. But it doesn't matter what generation you are. I think you'd appreciate the fact that you can actually go and pursue these things. The other piece is, I think, working with our people to identify their individual purpose statements. So it's one thing for your organization to say that this is what we represent. It's another thing to understand and put a stake in the ground, working with our people as to what they represent. And I've been speaking into largely, predominantly, I'd say boomer and Xer audiences. And one of the first things I ask them is, raise your hand if you know what your purpose statement is. And it's never any more than 5% of the audience of the hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? Are you kidding me? How do you? So one of the best things I've ever done, 4 years ago, I did it, and mine's to inspire and connect. And it's evolved with time, but I know exactly what I represent. And I did this test, and I talk about it in the book, where I gave my team, I said during one of our status meetings that in 6 weeks, everyone's going to disclose their personal purpose statement. And it's going to be a Jeffersonian dinner, so only one person's allowed to talk at a time, and everyone's going to announce their purpose statement. Everyone's like, what?
Fear strikes the room.
Exactly. And then what ended up happening was the most special evening. I did it in both offices in Atlanta and Tampa. And it was so amazing to not only watch everyone put a stake in the ground as to what they represent with their purpose, but the coolest part was the next day, we looked at their individual purpose, we looked at their current job description, and then we looked at the overarching company purpose. And we said, all right, here are the 3 things that we're going to add to your job to get you closer to that purpose.
Wow.
Tactically. And so I don't care what generation you're a part of. I say, we're all these ants in this ant farm, and it's to a certain extent, it's a choose your own adventure. And I think that more than anything, we just got to open ourselves up to that. So once again, millennials aren't the problem. They just expose a lot of the problems. And so part of that kind of generational, what we need to overcome is just, it's more of this ego stuff where it's like, well, I had to do it this way. They've got to go through that. I had to do it. Like, it's more of getting rid of that stuff in the marketplace than anything else. And then we just got to make our places a little bit better for choose your own adventure. Take down those walls in between your departments. Allow people to move laterally, to actually pursue our evolving passions and our evolving purposes. And, that's my quick tirade.
Okay. I love that. You mentioned early on during rapid fire questions that there is this magic that happens when purpose and passion collide. A lot of people are trying to find that in culture today. What is my purpose? What is my passion? And then they're trying to figure out how to make that work for whether it's building a business as an entrepreneur, whether that's fitting into culture and society. And I think that more and more people feel like outliers. And what's really happening is that they're just not understanding that a lot of people in society and culture feel that way right now. They feel like they don't have something pushing them forward, that purpose. They aren't like enthralled with something with passion. How can people begin to start to discover that and then have that synergy of collision between the purpose and passion that drives them to have that impact, to have that driving force of direction in where they're going and what they're doing?
Great. I mean, I think it's a great question. I think the first thing is just putting on paper or putting somewhere what it is that your purpose is, right? And
so if they don't know what that even means for them, how do they struggle through that and find
so
that?
you got to start somewhere. I mean, at least start the exercise.
Okay.
And starting is half the thing, right? I mean, I feel like as humans, it seems so daunting when we try to do any of these big things.
Right.
And as a society, we only hold up once you climb the mountain, once you finish the marathon, and instead we don't take as much, we don't celebrate the ride as much. And so just starting that ride towards discovering your purpose is important to like regardless of even if you figure it out, at least you're saying, generally speaking, I know my interests lie in this area.
Yeah.
Right. And so I talk about with this, I talk about my friend. I was going back to Vanderbilt for a reunion and I was catching up with him and I was like, Dan, so good to see you. How's the law firm going? And he's like, dude, are you kidding me? I left the law firm 8 years ago and
Wow.
I'm just finishing my residency to be a radiologist. And I think a lot of people would be like, what in the world are you thinking? I was like, congratulations. That's so awesome that you actually figured that out so young, at such a young time in your life.
Yeah.
You didn't actually have to hit your midlife crisis to go and seek that change, which I feel like a lot of us end up doing. And so is that exactly what he wants to do in the end? No, but being a doctor is a hell of a lot closer to it than being a lawyer. So to me, it's just starting the process somewhere. And, I've done a purpose exercise with Tommy, and he's got some really good, I think, tools to help people with this.
Yeah.
But there are also lots of resources out there where, and in my book, I talk about how I did it with my team, but it's answering simple questions of where do you just lose track of time? What is it that you stand for, blah, blah, blah. But just going through those exercises will at least give you flexing that muscle of pursuing that purpose will push you into a new direction. And I think we're always so scared to take that leap, to take that jump. But what ultimately ends up allowing us to take that leap are lots of these little things. And it's exercising those muscles that end up being that big thing. So, I mean, I think it's taking action, baby, just start.
All right. We always ask these questions, and typically we do it at the beginning, but I wanted to kind of bring them back because I think this is a perfect time in the episode to talk about it. The first one is, how do you find purpose in what you do? Tell us a story of how you're finding purpose right now.
So, I mean, my whole thing is everything that I'm doing is, first of all, my purpose is to inspire and connect. And so I will actually put everything through that filter of, am I doing what I said to do? And I would also say that on top of my own purpose, it's bringing more empathy and more connection into our lives. And so I put, as I'm prioritizing, which once again, I don't do more than 3 things at a time on my priority list.
Can we stop right there? You said that a couple times. What does that look like? Can you go a little bit deeper? Because I'm fascinated about that you only, so each day you have 3 things that you're setting out to do.
Yep.
How do you process that? How do you put that together?
So it's the first thing I do in the morning. And it usually goes on my whiteboard.
Okay.
And, or it'll just go in my notebook, but I've got 10 million things, and anyone that's published a book or started a company, which I'm kind of doing both right now.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
So out of all of those things, and I don't know how, there's no method to the madness, but I'm like, these are the 3 things that I'm going to check off my list today. So one is send an invoice to X company that I just spoke at and sold a bunch of companies, and figure out the next meeting. The other one is prioritize finding finding time to meet with this individual who's very hard to nail down. And then the third one is to finish writing this article. Those are two very I need to make sure that whatever three things that I set out to do in the day there's one that's an easy to get, right? It'll help you create that momentum through the day.
Yeah.
One is more of a further reach. So the opposite of that, where it's like, if you're not going to know unless you try, so might as well reach out.
Yeah.
And then there's something that is actually tangible in nature that will live through content. So it might be a video, it might be a Q&A, it might be something that can actually scale, right? And so that's how I do it. And every single day I get it done. And I end up usually doing probably 30 things that then come off of those three. But by just having the focus of three, it's a lot less daunting than a list of 30. So that's essentially how I do it.
But it doesn't mean that those are the only three things. Like, obviously you're on this interview right now, that was a part of your day, but that wasn't part of your three.
That's part of my schedule. That's right.
Okay, cool. Now let's go back to that question here. How are you finding purpose in what you do? Sorry to interrupt you there, but I think there was something really good there to be taken away, and I wanted to make sure to hit that.
Sure. Yeah. So then on the purpose thing, I put everything through the filter of prioritization, whatever it is, what meetings I'm taking, what it is that I'm setting out to do in my day. Everything follows essentially my purpose. And, the other thing that, once again, going back to Tommy, that he's taught me is, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
Yeah.
And so making sure that the most precious thing in our life is time. And, and I think we spend a lot of it in the wrong places, or we learn where those places lie. So for me, it's, almost being ruthless about prioritization and then putting everything through that filter of purpose, but then also making sure that you have the kind of tangible pieces of what that purpose looks like in terms of impact, right? And so for me, it's changing every day, but it's a little ridiculous, right? I want to be in every airport with my book out there. I want to be, it's very tactical and tangible goals that I have in place of pursuing these, and they're ridiculous, some of them.
Yeah.
The first one was becoming a bestseller, and we did it, The other one was being in every single airport, and we did it. Well, we'll do it June 1st. The next one is I'm going to be on the Today Show or the Colbert, or with Colbert. It's ridiculous, but we'll probably do it. But everything goes through this metric of having impact, and impact is, how do we bring more, my purpose is to inspire and connect. And how do we bring more love and empathy into our world and more connection? And I think that's where greatest deficit lies. So
what is one challenge you're currently working to overcome in your own business?
Any entrepreneur or any writer or anyone that's taken a big risk will go through this roller coaster of your critic will come out. And it is the process of silencing the self-critic when it comes out and saying, the second guessing that happens in life. And so I think in my business, in life, and everything that I'm doing, it's learning ways to power through those moments, even though if it's not fun, to tell that self-critic, nope, you got this thing. You got this thing. You just got to keep going, because what we're trying to set out is not easy. And that's why a lot of people don't take this route. So I think it's really, it's doing that.
And then for you, what's the next big goal you have for what you're doing?
So I'm currently building a business out of the book.
Okay.
So, one of my goals and one of my priorities is to try to not be on a plane every single week, making speeches all over the place, which I think a lot of people see as a byproduct of what a successful book looks like. And instead, I'm actually spending the next 2 months building a digital curriculum that can scale within organizations, big and small, but then also across a true business that can have impact and create real revenues to then enhance the change and impact that we're trying to make in the world. So that my big thing now is spending the next 2 months building this back-end digital curriculum. And like I tell a lot of people, it's like that scene out of Braveheart where Mel Gibson is like right behind the berm and you got that massive army coming.
Yeah.
And he's just saying, hold. Yeah. So right now it's also making sure we don't get distracted with some of these big alluring things and just double down and getting this curriculum done. So that should launch towards the end of August. And we'll be off to, we're already kind of off to the races, and I'm working with 5 very large companies locally to help build out some of these case studies as to how you can bring this book to life within our organizations, and then also how that contributes to ROI and our bottom line. So that's kind of my focus now.
As we move towards the end of this episode, I wanted to make sure that I asked this question. There are a lot of leaders, a lot of CEOs, a lot of executives, a lot of entrepreneurs that listen, and they may be looking at the workforce trying to figure out, how does this look for us? What do they need to take into consideration for moving forward and really impacting and engaging a millennial generation in their workforce?
So, I can say tactically, I think as organizations, we always think that one person needs to lead. And as you look at some of these key things that this next generation is prioritizing and looking for in their leaders, it's hard to come by. So one, I would say, as you build out your organizations, look at pairing up people, bring order, the like COOs of the world, and then also the visionaries and creators, and pair them up together versus asking someone to be all things to all people. And so I think one concept we need to see more of in our world, but then also as you're looking at building out teams and also within yourselves, start changing the way you evaluate yourself. And, that's inspirational leadership, that's autonomy, the ability to give autonomy, transparency, and purpose. And so, inspirational leadership is one of those where it's so up to judgment, right, as to whether or not someone's inspirational. And I've actually created a Millennial Leadership Assessment, which assesses things like inspiration. And what's funny about inspiration is you ask Bob, hey, Bob, are you an inspirational leader? Bob's like, hell yeah, I am. They light up anytime I talk to them. And then you're like, okay, thanks, Bob. And you ask 2 people on Bob's team, hey, is Bob an inspirational leader? And they're like, well, one, is Bob going to find out? It's like, no, Bob's not going to find out. And it's like, okay, no, he's not inspirational. And so, as we look at some of these metrics, like how are we actually judging people? So mine's a 360, the Millennial Leadership Assessment. It's a 360 assessment that evaluates people on these new things. And so I think that evaluating people with these new metrics is essential to moving our organizations forward, but also promoting people for the right characteristics.
Super cool. The assessment's very cool. I tried to take it, but then I realized it's just me right now. I don't really have a team, so that doesn't work. 5 years ago, it probably would have been a lot better when I had a big team working around me. But all that to say, as we wrap up today's episode, we've talked about a lot. What's the final thought you want to leave our audience with?
Take action. So start somewhere. One of the things that has really struck a chord out there is this idea of turning let's into buy when. And I think we live in a society where instant gratification is the norm. And, there's nothing more unaccountable than saying, let's do this or let's do that. Let's create this. Let's hit this benchmark. And so I then say, okay, let's bring instant accountability by just answering that let's with a buy when. And I encourage everyone to try this in their personal lives, especially as they're coming out of a meeting or they're going to some conference. It's like, people will say, let's grab lunch or let's grab dinner. And then nothing happens.
Yeah.
So immediately in that moment, say, buy when. And guess what? You're either going to see that person didn't want to hang out with you and grab dinner or a drink, or you're going to find yourself at dinner or a drink or coffee in 2 weeks, and you're going to say, wow, I can't believe that actually happened.
Yeah.
And so my big thing is take action, start somewhere, and just keep that going. And I think with that big change happens with lots of small pieces. So that's how I would leave you.
Once again, we want to thank today's guest, Chris Tuff, for taking time out. Make sure to go check out what he's doing at themillennialwhisperer.com. We also want to thank today's sponsor, Penji. Get 15% off when you use the code JUMBLE to sign up for unlimited graphic design at a low monthly rate at penji.com. And finally, we want to thank you for tuning in. It's your turn now. Get out there, chase those dreams and ideas, and change the world around you.
Que vous serez maître de votre corps, vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.